Right now on the DIY Gourmet, we're making pork chops. And not just any pork chops. These pork chops, when done right, will make it so that you may never experience a dry pork chop again. So bear with me as we go through the recipe here. And what we're going to do is start with a nice hot pan. You got to preheat that pan in almost everything what you do. It doesn't matter if it's stainless steel, it doesn't matter if it's coated, it doesn't matter if it's copper or whatever, you got to preheat it. And then you put the oil down and you get that oil all around there. It usually takes about 2 tablespoons, sometimes 3. And once that's there, you make sure that that's nice and hot. Give it about 30 seconds depending on how high you've got your heat. And for a good sear on a pork chop, you're going to want to have a high heat. And so when you've got that high heat, you put that oil there, that 2 to 3 tablespoons, and then you're ready to put your pork chop down. But you're going to put it with the fat side down so it has time to sear. Solid 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 depending on how thick. And what we've got here is 1 3/4 inches to about 2 inches thick. It's about 5 centimeters, 3 to 5 centimeters, depending on which measurement system you're using. Now you've got it turned there. Now you're going to turn it over after that 2.5 to 3 minutes. You're going to give it another 2 minutes on the other side, maybe not quite as long, because it is in fact a little less fatty on the other side of it. But you're going to want to make sure and get a good sear nonetheless. And so after the edges have been seared nicely, you're going to go to the sides. And so you'll turn one side over, and then you'll cook that for about 2.5 to 3 minutes to get the sear. And this is still on the high heat. And this is where sticking with the video is really going to come in, because after that has the 2 minutes, you're going to flip it over and do the other side for another 2.5 to 3 minutes. But the real money, the real place you do this is after you get that final 2.5 minutes, and then a little bit of side edge sear on the tendon side and a little bit on the other side. Those don't need to be quite as long. That can be about a minute on each side, especially on the tendon side, because it only needs to soften it up long enough to get it where it's going to go into a longer cook, because this isn't quite done. This is a 20-minute recipe. And so in doing this with a larger, thicker cut of pork chop, you really risk the threat of drying out the pork chop if you don't let it cook at a slow heat. But in order to let it cook at a slow heat, you also have to have a most excellent sear on the outside of the pork chop. If you don't, the juices will seep out during the low heat cooking process. And that's what it brings us to, because at this point, we're going to lower the heat to about 30% of the flame, maybe 20% depending on how big of a burner is underneath. And you're going to let it cook slow, and you're going to turn it probably every few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. Don't take too much time to obsess over it, but you do have to make sure that that middle is cooking to exactly where you want it. And I'll say this about slow cooking meats in general, especially more delicate meats or finer cuts of meat that require a more gentle hand. Now, at first, when you're handling them, you're going to need to sear the outside, get that Maillard effect working properly, make it so that it's cauterized, so to speak, and so that the juices are not going to leak out when they are being asked to cook inside of there very slowly and very gently, so that you're not making a tough fiber out of a delicate cut of meat. And after the first 10 to 12 minutes of searing on high heat, that pork chop is ready for some low heat. In fact, it's almost just an extended carryover cooking from the high heat cooking, and you're maintaining it long enough so that it can reach internal temperatures that are going to be acceptable so that people can consume them safely. So for the next 6 to 7 minutes after the 10 to 12 minutes of the searing on all sides, then you're going to take it down to a very low heat, not quite where it's just keeping the pan warm, but you're going to keep it where it would be a simmer, a low heat, almost not medium, kind of low heat. And so during that process, you're going to turn it over once or twice so that the evenness goes to both of the sides, since the fire comes from below. Also, do be sure to use a lid, because it's the ambient temperature that's going to help the pork chop cook more evenly and not become dried out and chewy. You're going to collect some liquid inside of the pan, and that's going to be just wonderful. You can also use the spring test a little bit to test to see if the meat is getting close. Use a thermometer to be absolutely certain, and that's the safest way to do it. But do pay attention to how the meat feels at the temperature that you like to eat it, because that'll help you in the future be a little more ready. And so after that 6th to 7th minute, you go ahead and turn the heat back up on the pan, and this is where we can start to deglaze for the final minute before we let it rest into carryover cooking. And this is where the magic really happens. So once you get that pan heated up, toss a little bit of balsamic vinegar in there, maybe a teaspoon or two depending on how much you like to have your strength and your tanginess within your pork chop. And so you let it go, you turn the fire off after that, and then you're going to let it sit because it's not quite done at this point. You've got about 19 minutes in, maybe starting into 20, and so this is where the resting magic is going to happen in the last 2 minutes while you're waiting for it to become carryover cooked just enough and rest so that it's perfectly ready to slice in a juicy, moist pork chop that you can use just about for anything. And quite frankly, will have a little bit of life in it if you should decide to use it for par cooking and reheating later. Now, if you should happen to use it for par cooking to reheat later as part of a meal prep system, then the very last step you're going to want to wait to do until you're actually heating it up to consume, because that last step is really what finishes off the sauce, and that's why you're going to make sure and not get rid of the sauce inside of that pan, because that's going to be the deglaze, the almost very light velouté, a use of the fond in order to take that and keep it saucy for when you're ready to use it later. Also, another good step for par cooking is to not slice it until you're ready to use it, and that would be some good advice for just about any cut of meat that you're going to use in a par cooking or a prepping system, because once you slice it, it becomes a lot more delicate in the reheat process. So if you can keep it whole as long as possible, then you're going to retain all the natural juices that are inside and meant to be there, and they're not going to leak out when you're trying to heat them up. So if you are cooking these pork chops for consumption directly, then we'll be transitioning into the last step, which is the adding of the final liaison. However, if you're par cooking them, then at this point we're getting to a place where they can be cooled and put into a separate container and then used inside of whatever cooking system or preparation work that needs to be, so that it can help organize and keep your cooking smoother and with less effort when it comes to time to put everything together at the last mile. Because let's face it, convenience is nice, but preparation is prudent and also helps with frugality. So on to the last step. If these are about to be served, then at the very end, at the last minute, maybe minute and a half, you put a nice little pat of butter on top, maybe a tablespoon, maybe a half, depending on how you prefer. And so in the pan, it will start to melt, and you can cover it back up if you like. That helps it to melt a little bit more quickly if the ambient air happens to be a bit cool. You can also keep it on a lower heat in doing so, like a super low, just keeping warm heat, not like cooking temperature heat. And put the butter underneath it if you need to. But when you finish it off with the sauce in the pan after the reduction of the balsamic vinegar mixed with the pork juices that were created while the meat was cooking, then what you have is a delicious pork chop that will be rather soft. And when it comes time to slice it, you're going to want to make sure that you give it the proper rest time, because it is going to be juicy and soft inside. Take a look. Here we go as we open it up, and look at that. Perfect, beautiful white pork meat inside from a delicate pork loin, and it is nice and sliceable. Do it yourself, gourmet. See you next time.